What is up, guys? It is MMA back at you with another video. This time it is going to be a full breakdown with predictions for every fight on the stacked UFC 300 card. We're going to be starting at the early prelims, working our way all the way up to the main event. This video is probably going to be long as hell. I haven't even started recording the rest of it yet, so I don't really know what the length is going to end up being. And as you can see, as retaliation for leaking the script earlier, I've been confined to this little bubble. But in active defiance, I've decided I'm going to just go into the void for the rest of this video just so I can keep as much information as possible on the screen. But yeah, like I said, the video is going to be long as hell no matter what, so we might as well get started with the first matchup on the early prelims. So the first matchup on the early prelims is honestly a gigabanger. Super excited for this one. I wasn't super stoked when they booked it because I wanted to see Figgy fight someone who was in the rankings, probably someone higher ranked than him because he looked so good against Rob Font. But I'm still pretty stoked for it. It's a champ v champ matchup here as the 8th ranked bantamweight in the world, Deiveson Figueiredo, faces off with the former bantamweight champion of the world, Cody Garbrandt, who does not currently hold a place in the rankings. Obviously, Deiveson Figueiredo, former flyweight champ, Cody Garbrandt, former bantamweight champ. Pretty awesome fight. And this was actually supposed to be booked back in 2020 for the belt as well. So not quite the same stakes, but these guys do have some bad blood with each other still from that booking. So there was a little bit of trash talk leading up to this fight. Cody said that Deiveson did not want this fight at all. So really interesting. The biggest differences in the tail of the tape are going to be in the height, the reach, and the age. But with all three of those, there's something that would be kind of misleading with them. So you'd expect Cody Garbrandt, the taller fighter, to have a reach advantage, but as we know with Volk, that's not always the case. It's actually a 3-inch advantage in reach going the way of Deiveson Figueiredo here. And the confusing thing about the age, I would say, is that while he's 36 compared to Cody Garbrandt's 32, Cody Garbrandt's been knocked out 4 times, and some of those have been some pretty brutal knockouts, and some of them have been in sequence with each other, meaning that several portions of a year were spent being knocked out repeatedly, which is not great for the body at all. And the only win by knockout that anybody has ever scored over Deiveson Figueiredo was the win that Brandon Moreno got by doctor stoppage because of a swollen eye. So it's not really the same at all. And it's also going to do a lot less lasting damage to Deiveson's brain. So I think he has been overall in less compromising situations for his brain, which I think makes that age number not as significant to think about, especially considering that Figgy still looks fast at this weight and at this age, which obviously is going to have some part to play with the fact that he's moving up from flyweight. Now, the big issues I see for Cody Garbrandt in this fight is that obviously he's chinny as fuck, but his best odds of winning this fight are still by getting a knockout, because his offensive grappling isn't really going to be a factor here because Figgy's the better grappler and he's never won a fight by sub. So obviously that's not really on the cards. His way to win this fight is by knocking Figgy out. And one, we don't know what Figgy's chin really looks like at bantamweight because he never really got seriously touched by anything in the Rob Font fight or hurt at all. But Rob Font's also notoriously sort of pillow-handed, so we don't really have a serious read on that, which Cody Garbrandt could give us the read on if he is winging a nasty hook as Figgy tries to get into the pocket. But Figgy can also work behind that range too and make it really hard for Garbrandt to fight and get into his head and make Garbrandt blitz forward, which Figgy can capitalize on by counter-striking as well. So I see a lot of problems for Garbrandt in this matchup, and I think that if it gets into an ego duel, then it's over because Cody Garbrandt's kind of stupid. And guys, realistically, even though he's on a return of form here where he's looking a lot better in his recent fights, I still don't think that that stupidity in him is something that can be bred out. It's like part of how he fights, and it's just innate to him that if he gets mad, he's going to start fighting dumb. And I think it's possible for Figgy to get him mad since there is all that prior history. So the culmination of all of those factors is why I've got to pick Deiveson Figueiredo to win this fight by knockout in round 1 or 2. On here, I'm going to put 2. So if it ends up happening in round 1, I don't get to cope and say that I said round 1 or 2. But do know that I think it's possible it happens in the first as well. But I see them trading on the feet. I really don't expect Figgy to involve his grappling in this matchup because he did say he was working on his striking a lot for it. And being on UFC 300 to open the card is a fantastic opportunity for him to show that, knock out a former champion at bantamweight, and try and call for a title shot. I know that sounds stupid, and I don't think that he deserves one. I don't think he should call for one. And I think he should call for something better and more realistic. Because if you beat Cody Garbrandt, you're not getting a title shot. But you might be able to call for like a Corey Sandhagen or something like that. Say like, hey man, screw fighting Umar, fight me. I'm the one who deserves to be fighting for the belt next. That's what the title eliminator looks like. And I feel like that makes a lot more sense, honestly, than Cody fighting Umar. And I'm a big Dagestani enjoyer too. So if you take it from me, you can take it from anyone else. So that's what I think we're going to see, though. I think we're going to see Figgy keeping it on the feet. I think that there's going to be some feeling out to an extent, but I think that Figgy is largely going to be the one pushing the action here. He's going to get Cody pressed up against the cage. And Cody's going to either have to try and circle out and reset towards the center of the octagon, or he is going to have to blitz forward and get some space off of Deiveson Figueiredo. But either one of those, I think, spells disaster for him as the fight goes on. Figgy's able to make reads, and Figgy's able to hurt him and make those movements more exacerbated. So he's, getting out of the pocket more frantically because he's worried about the power. And that's, when Cody Garbrandt gets caught with a lot of shots because he doesn't really think about which side is the power side in a lot of matchups and is totally fine circling to that side often. So I do see Deiveson Figueiredo getting it done by KO. But no matter how Figgy gets it done, I'm really confident in him in this matchup. The only thing that I would be worried about would be if he was resorting to some of the worst tendencies that he had over his quadrilogy with Moreno, where he would get into the pocket, land some strikes, and then kind of sit there and admire his work. And I low-key be doing that too when I spar, so I understand it, Figgy. But recently in his fights, especially in that one with Rob Font, he's been doing a lot better of keeping a continuous movement system throughout the whole fight, where he knows where he wants to circle, he knows when he wants to go in and what he wants to use to cover distance, he knows where he wants to leave the pocket, all of that stuff. It makes me feel really confident in picking Figgy here, and I think you should too. One fight that I'm less confident in but still feel like I've got the right pick on is this next one on the card. The 14th ranked Bobby Green in the lightweight division is facing off against Jim fucking Miller. And this is a pretty exciting fight too. I don't expect it to be anything too crazy, but just seeing Jim Miller make it all the way to UFC 300 is badass. And I really hope that he is able to get the job done here. I think the biggest things to look at in terms of the tail of the tape is that obviously they're both old as hell. And their records are insane when you put them together. Let's see, we've got 68 wins, 32 losses, one draw, and two no contests. So that's 103 fights between the two of them. That's insane. That's actually just nutty. And if I messed up the math, correct me in the comments. I was just doing it in my head. I didn't really prefer. I'd rather prepare to do that. But I just thought that was kind of nuts. One thing to note: Jim Miller does have a negative record when fights go to decision. One of the only times you'll see a fighter with that many fights who has a negative record by any method here, and it's just because he's been fighting for so long and he's quite the finisher, so he tends to prefer to get it done early. On their most recent runs, I'm not going to highlight too much of it. Obviously, you have 2 wins over Grant Dawson and Tony Ferguson. I'm going to say that Grant Dawson win is the best one for Bobby Green too, though it's tough to say because there's some wins earlier in his career you could argue, but I think that one this late in his career over a guy as talented as that, when you're not really a knockout guy traditionally in the UFC and haven't been for a while, really impressive there. But the only thing I really want to highlight about their last 5 at all is the fact that Bobby Green got not knocked out by Jalen Turner, but knocked out like 9 times by Jalen Turner in the same fight. And that is going to have an effect on him. I don't know if it's going to be a career-ending effect on him or not. Obviously, he's taken this fight. Have to imagine there's some sparring in camp. He's been around the block. He's been knocked out 4 times prior to that, so it's not like he's never been knocked out before. But he had been knocked out 4 times prior, and now he's essentially 11 and 13 by KO because he got knocked out 9 times in the same fight. And that will have an impact. And when you're fighting somebody as hard hitting as Jim Miller, who can still knock you out at lightweight at 40 years old, it does, give me some weariness. Do I think that Jim Miller is going to be able to work behind the double jab to force out Bobby Green pulls and knock him out the same way Jalen Turner did? Probably not. He doesn't have the same frame. He doesn't have the same reach advantage that Jalen Turner had in that fight. But he can crack and he can find the home for a nasty meaty hook, a nasty right hand, something like that to end Bobby Green's night. And while his head movement's super good, he just needs to not duck once, and it's going to be a significant problem. And I think that him being compromised in that last fight is going to pose some serious issues. Combination of those factors leads me to pick Jim Miller to get it done in round 1 by knockout. Main reason I'm going with round 1 is honestly, but for the vibes. Jim Miller getting it done round 1 to complete the UFC 100, 200, 300 trilogy. Him getting wins at all of them. Maybe it's just me wanting the fairy tale to come true, but I could really see this happening. It's my pick. And go out there and get it done, Jim Miller. Make it a banger. But moving on up the card, we have the 4th ranked strawweight in the world, Jessica Andrade, taking on the 6th ranked strawweight in the world, Marina Rodriguez. And this fight's gotten a lot of hate, but honestly, I'm pretty excited for this one too. The more I think about it, it did end up in the bottom of my tier list. But if I wasn't trolling with the Cody Brundage Bo Nickal fight, if I'm being honest, I'd probably put that one lower. That one's kind of creeping up a little bit low key as well as this one because I'll talk about that later, but I'll explain why it's creeping up when we get there. But this matchup is pretty exciting as well. The biggest notes here are in the height and reach. Marina Rodriguez a lot taller and a lot lankier than Jessica Andrade. And while she does have the age of 4 years over Jessica Andrade, again, it's similar to the Figgy Garbrandt one, where because she is so chinny, Andrade has been through some more wars, some more knockouts on the receiving end rather than Rodriguez has. So I don't think that she's wearing the distance of her career so much as Andrade is at this point. I don't see this fight going to the ground. I think that Rodriguez's defense for takedowns isn't the best, but it is improving, and I wouldn't see Jessica Andrade employing her grappling offensively unless she gets hurt severely. And I do see her getting hurt severely too in this fight. While she does have the ability to put Marina Rodriguez out, I think that Marina Rodriguez is just so lengthy that she can use her striking both at range and in the clinch to land brutal elbows and knees to Jessica Andrade and eventually wilt away at her to score a round 2 KO. That's right. I'm switching it from the tier list video. Did say I thought that this one would go the distance, and I did at the time, and I still do think that there's a good chance of that. But if you can get a good line on the under here, it's not a bad bet because I think that if Marina Rodriguez is getting ambitious for the finish, Jessica Andrade does have the power to put any woman's lights out. But I see her either scoring a doctor stoppage from some brutal cuts with those just nasty long elbows in the clinch, or wilting away both at Jessica Andrade's body with those knees and with the clinch striking to eventually score a knockout win and just keep an incredibly exciting early prelims going, which might be halted by this next matchup as we have 10th ranked lightweight in the world, Jalen Turner, taking on Renato Moicano, who currently sits at number 13. This fight is probably going to be super good. I could see a realm to it being boring if Renato Moicano is able to score takedowns and ground control time on Jalen Turner, without mounting any serious ground control offense or getting his back or getting deep on a submission attempt or anything like that. But it does promise to be really interesting. And there's a couple of things in this matchup that I think are really interesting. Now, one is that Jalen Turner is a freak at lightweight, 77-inch reach, 6'3". It's crazy he makes weight, and it's crazy he's able to make weight on short notice too. Against Bobby Green, he was able to do that. But I think that could pose some interesting problems, not necessarily to Turner, who will still boast all of the same lanky man advantages that he does in all of his fights, but more so to Renato Moicano, who is normally the lankier man, was able to lanky man the hell out of Drew Dober by utilizing tons of leverage in the clinch to not really ever shoot and get significant wrestling offense mounted against Dober in that way, but more so work from the clinch to get Dober down. And he's able to do that, but also strike at range well with a lot of lightweights because of that frame. And he doesn't really have those advantages anymore. So it'll be interesting to see what he's able to do there. There's also the difference in age. So obviously, Moicano been a little bit more around the block. What I think is extremely interesting to note is that Jalen Turner is one of few fighters on today's video who has a method of victory, whether it be decision, knockout, or sub. Obviously, we saw Cody Garbrandt earlier, who had no wins and no losses by sub. But this is a fighter who has no wins, but still has losses by a method. 0-4 by decision is Jalen Turner, and 3 of them were splits. Only Matt, the steamroller Frivola, was able to cleanly get through Jalen Turner by decision. And that's really interesting going into this matchup, I gotta say, especially when you see that we've got 8-1 by decision for Renato Moicano, but you also have another fighter who's 0 and some losses by a method on the other side, because Renato Moicano has never won a fight by knockout and has lost 3 of them by knockout. But it's been a bit since we saw him getting knocked out because he has been on a run as of late. And then the submission element here is really interesting too. Obviously, one of the biggest routes for Renato Moicano to win this fight against somebody in Jalen Turner, who we have some questions about his cardio since he has such a big cut down to lightweight, but also in somebody who's had most of his major high-profile losses come to grapplers, whether it be the Garbrandt loss or the Steamroller Frivola loss. There is a noted weakness on the book for him in that regard, but he's also never lost by sub. So again, I see there being a route to victory for Renato Moicano there and controlling him on the ground, but I don't necessarily see him subbing him. And I do think that his striking is quite a bit worse than Jalen Turner's. That's not necessarily a knock on his striking. Jalen Turner's got some of the best striking in the lightweight division, but I see a lot of problems for both guys in this matchup. I feel really conflicted on it. But I think ultimately I'm going to go with Renato Moicano by split decision. I want it to be a Jalen Turner win so bad, guys, because I want him to be able to make a serious run here and kind of see him in a really high-profile matchup with a top striker in the division, like Turner versus Fiziev. If he wins this, would be so cool, something like that. But it's not meant to happen. Every time I pick him here, he loses, but I want to do it so bad. I'm switching the pick. The slide says Renato Moicano by split decision, but I'm picking Jalen Turner to knock him out in round 2. He's going to get controlled on the ground for some part of round 1. They're going to be striking competitively on the feet with each other, but you're going to see that Moicano does not have the ability to stand with Jalen Turner as he wobbles him with some strikes or at least stuns him early, and that's what forces Moicano to have more urgency in getting the grappling done. You'll see some submission attempts from Jalen Turner, but none of them getting too deep on Renato Moicano. Renato Moicano is going to be able to advance position on the ground. He might be able to, keep heavy on him in half guard and get some ground and pound going and try and get over an amount, but I think Jalen Turner will be able to kind of keep him into a half guard situation for a lot of the round. And then in round 2, I think at some point you're going to see Jalen Turner land a high kick on Renato Moicano and follow it up with his hands and score a knockout win in round 2. But if I get it wrong, then that's what I get for switching my pick. because I know Jalen Turner is meant to lose this fight because I'm picking him now, but I want him to win so bad. Don't put him in your parlay, though. Don't put him in your parlay. Isn't he the favorite here? Renato Moicano is probably better for your parlay than Jalen Turner, I think. I kind of have a better vision of Renato Moicano winning this fight, but I want Turner to win so bad. But we're kind of working into a similar matchup in the next one where I really want a guy to win, but I don't necessarily have the tape back up to support him winning. And that's going to be the matchup between Sadiq Yusuff, who currently sits at number 13 in the featherweight rankings, versus Diego Lopes, who is unranked. This fight is going to be super fun no matter how it goes. I think the biggest things to know here are that I think Diego Lopes obviously trains under the tutelage of Francisco Grasso. I think his boxing fundamentals and overall his striking is perhaps a little bit cleaner than Sadiq Yusuff. I don't know why I said striking, mostly just the boxing. I think Sadiq Yusuff's kick game is really good. I think it is better than Diego Lopes. I think Sadiq Yusuff can hold his own on the ground enough that I don't see Diego Lopes getting the tap at any point in this fight. But I could definitely see either guy knocking the other one out too. I think that that's probably how this fight ends, no matter who you're picking. Because while he only has the one loss on his record by knockout, we did see him get hurt by Edson Barboza. We did also see Arnold Allen drop him twice in their fight. So it's not like he can't get hurt. And obviously, 2 losses on record for Diego Lopes by knockout. And Mavzar was able to hurt him at points in their fight. And that dude, I believe, is required by the commissions to have pillows in his gloves. That's the only explanation for why he hits so soft in most of his fights. But Sadiq Yusuff doesn't hit soft in his fights. He hits hard as fuck. Diego Lopes also hits super hard, and he's always dangerous, whether it's on the feet or on the ground. I do think he's able to sub Sadiq Yusuff. I just don't see it being the most likely way that this fight ends by any means. And I think that a lot of people are picking it just because Diego Lopes is that sub guy. But I don't see Sadiq Yusuff being a guy he can do that to. And the weaknesses, I think, are important here because Diego Lopes is able to be really exciting and have big moments in his fights. And if Sadiq Yusuff is willing to kind of have a more chill fight with Diego Lopes, where Diego Lopes then gets to dictate when the big moments are and what they are, he will lose a decision to Diego Lopes, even though Diego Lopes isn't that good when it goes to decision, at least compared to Sadiq Yusuff. On the other hand, if Sadiq Yusuff and Diego Lopes are in a pretty high output contest with each other, where Diego Lopes is employing his grappling as well, then I could see that wearing on his cardio and making it easier for the Sadiq Yusuff to find openings on the feet later in the fight, which a combination of these factors, while I don't feel super confident and I'd highly recommend avoiding betting on this fight, I am going to go ahead and pick Sadiq Yusuff to get it done over Diego Lopes. Now, I know I said on the slide here round 2 KO, and I do get the vibe that a lot of fighters are going to be looking for the finish here on UFC 300, and I think that Sadiq Yusuff by KO is very much an active and live bet in this fight. I don't see it being the way that this fight ends the more that I think about it. I see Sadiq Yusuff winning a convincing decision, probably 29-28 to Diego Lopes. I see Lopes being able to implement his grappling to get some advantageous positions and land some ground and pound on Sadiq Yusuff to pick up the round that he does win. Possibly get deep in on a submission attempt, but Sadiq Yusuff defends it. I see Sadiq Yusuff being able to take control of the fight behind his leg kicks and his kicks to the body, and kind of level the disparity in the boxing skill that Diego Lopes does bring in before eventually wearing on him and in the 3rd round scoring a knockdown with his hands. Could even score a knockdown in round 1 with his hands, but I think that Diego Lopes is more technical in terms of the boxing than Sadiq Yusuff. So I will be picking him to win by decision. And there's another fight that I see going to decision coming up next, which is the matchup at women's 135 between Holly Holm, who currently sits at 5th ranked in the women's 135 division, and Kayla Harrison, who is making her UFC debut. If you're not aware of Kayla Harrison, she is one of the big standouts who's not in the UFC in terms of the women's game, but she doesn't actually fight at women's 135. She fights at women's 155, which, if you don't watch outside of the UFC, is a weight class you've never seen anything from before, because the highest we go is 145 technically, but that division barely exists. So the interesting things in this matchup to really look at are, one, that Holly Holm is old as fuck. She's 9 years older. Two, she's got a 3-inch reach advantage that she was able to use along with her incredible footwork to defeat one of the greatest women's judoka to ever compete in MMA, in Ronda Rousey, though that was years ago. And then as well, it's a Southpaw v Southpaw matchup, so those ones are always fun. Some of my favorites. Kayla Harrison is 16-1. That only loss coming recently to Larissa Pacheco, who was able to have big moments on the feet and mitigate most of Kayla Harrison's ground offense, keeping her in a closed guard for large portions of their fight. The best win for Holly Holm is a while ago with that win over Rousey. I thought about maybe picking the win over Raquel Pennington or Irene Aldana because they're both much more relevant divisionally, obviously, than Ronda is at this point in time. But there is relevance to the Ronda Rousey win, as she was able to mitigate the grappling of Rousey. How much of that is Ronda Rousey not ever having really faced anybody who could move correctly or like think about a game plan, Lord only knows. But you do see that huge disparity in the odds, and I think a big reason for that is because Holly Holm in more recent days has had struggles with fighters who want to apply a pace and grapple her. And even though it's not shown on her record as a loss by sub, she did get submitted by Ninja Choke by Myra Buena Silva in her last outing. It was just overturned because of a drug testing issue with Myra Buena Silva. So I think that that's the reason Kayla Harrison has such a disparity. But I think throwing a flyer on Holly Holm at 330 is considerable, even though I will end up picking Kayla Harrison in the matchup. The reason why is because of the scale. Now, Dana has said that Kayla Harrison has done 2 practice cuts to 135, and she can totally do it. But if you guys didn't know, she competed at women's 170 pounds in the Olympics when she competed. And she also, in, like I said, in MMA, is a 155er. So she's cutting an additional 20 pounds than what she was already cutting when she's probably walking around at 170 to make 155. And the result is she looks shredded. I mean, look at this. Her biceps look like they have metal tubes in them, bro. This stuff is crazy how shredded she is. And if she can make the weight, I am picking her for sure to win this matchup. I have very little doubt in her being able to ragdoll Holly Holm. And the more that I think about it, this might be one that I actually do switch the pickup on. The only reason I'm saying that is because my current pick for it is to have Kayla Harrison winning by decision. But if she can throw elbows, which she can't in the PFL, then she might be really brutal on top and be able to get some nasty work done. So you know what? I'm going to pick Kayla Harrison round 3 knockout, but unanimous decision is probably what's going to happen. But I'm just going to take the flyer, and I might bet like a knockout from Kayla Harrison too, because I bet the line is pretty good. But yeah, that's about all I have to say on this matchup. If she can't make weight, Holly Holm is not going to take the fight. But if she can make weight and is just super depleted from it, Holly Holm could definitely take advantage of that, especially seeing that Larissa Pacheco fight and now having tape of her losing very, very live. But next up, we've got Calvin Kattar facing off against Aljamain Sterling. The former of those calls the 8th rank home at the men's 145 division, whereas Aljamain Sterling obviously ranked number 2 at bantamweight, former champion down there. Big difference in height, slight difference in reach. And the major things that I want to highlight when talking about this matchup are that, one, the featherweight division doesn't really have a ton of premier grapplers in it. You've got Movsar Evloev making his way up the rankings now, and Calvin Kattar has not had any run-ins with him. You obviously have Diego Lopes as well, but no run-ins from Calvin Kattar with him either. And he has had a run-in with one notable grappler at featherweight, but it's been a while. We will talk about it later. But that's one thing to know, is that there's not really a ton of tape of Calvin Kattar recently fighting somebody who wants to take him down a lot. You don't really see it as much in this division as you see it in a lot of other ones, at least not right now. Pretty striking heavy division in the rankings. Whereas with Aljamain Sterling, the main thing I want to point out is that the reason he was able to be so successful at bantamweight is because of his size in there in all of those fights. It was a brutal cut for him, probably around 40 pounds from the sounds of it over camp, if we're to be believing what he said, maybe even more than that. And because of that, he's not only super long for the division, which you can see obviously he's now not at all. He's just pretty much the same size as Calvin Kattar, a little bit shorter and similar reach, but he's also not going to be nearly as strong. I do think that he did bulk up well to featherweight. I don't have the picture here in the slideshow, but you guys can find it now that he's got the picture for this week. He looks pretty shredded still at featherweight, and he does look a lot bigger. But it could pose some issues to him because he's not used to necessarily fighting guys of this size in the octagon. I know that he trains with guys who are bigger than him, but it's a different thing when you're actually fighting a guy who is an elite fighter who wants to either knock you out, submit you, or beat you by decision, whatever he has to do to get his hand raised in a super high profile position like this too. So that could pose a lot of problems to Aljamain Sterling in this matchup as well. But the one reason that I am going to end up picking Aljamain Sterling to win this fight is because Calvin Kattar did fight one of the more premier grapplers that at the time wasn't super premier grappler, but he's kind of come into his own. We've seen the skill set that he has. He was able to utilize that skill set to defeat Calvin Kattar before he moved up to lightweight. We've actually already talked about him in this video, and that's Renato Moicano, who also happens to be a backpack specialist who was able to utilize his grappling game plan along with his lanky build in the striking, which is similar to Aljo's build, obviously not boasting a reach advantage or anything like that, but neither was Renato Moicano. And I could see Aljamain Sterling being able to get it done. I do think that while Calvin Kattar is not a slouch in the grappling, that he hasn't been able to test his grappling against the caliber of fighters that Aljamain Sterling has had to at bantamweight. And I really see Aljamain Sterling getting this one done. I see him finishing this fight by brutal unanimous decision, 29-28 versus Calvin Kattar. I see Kattar probably picking up round one as Aljo's not able to close the distance properly, get clipped with some shots, have trouble getting in on any serious takedown attempts, and not be able to work his striking in as much. I see a really kick-heavy game plan coming out from Aljo on the feet. Obviously, he throws a lot of kicks all the time, but that's what he's going to need to be doing against somebody in Calvin Kattar who will have a slight reach advantage on him and who will know how to use that reach advantage against him as well. But yeah, I see Aljamain Sterling getting this one done, and then I see him calling out Ilia Topuria as well, which I don't think he will get. But that will move us into finally the last matchup on these crazy stacked prelims when Yuri Prochazka faces off against Alexander Rakic. This is a top 5 matchup at light heavyweight with the former champion Yuri taking up the number 2 spot and Rakic being just 3 spots behind him at number 5. It's a battle for Europe as well. 2-inch reach advantage goes to Yuri, and I think that could be significant because the 78-inch reach is pretty huge. And in most of his fights, Rakic has had the reach advantage. That extra 2 inches doesn't sound like a lot when you're actually fighting. It definitely is. The records are really interesting. Yuri actually has more knockouts than Rakic has fights. So that's something to think about for sure. Very little in the way of submissions from either guy. Yuri has only ever been to decision one time as well, which is really funny, and he won that. So congratulations to Yuri for that. The best win for Rakic is Anthony Smith, dude. That hurt for me to read when I was doing the tape study on this, that I had to write that down. The biggest strength for Yuri is also his biggest weakness, and it's that he's retarded. He's so weird, fights like a total idiot. Looks like he should lose the fight at all points in time, but somehow doesn't. Just refuses to fight well, is a Chad, wins the fight anyways. Very badass. And Rakic is fucking huge. That's his main advantage. And he's fucking hulking, but he can also make fights really boring, which can be a strength for him too. But in a lot of matchups, we don't want to see you as this huge guy with this crazy power on the feet laying on another guy. It makes us uninterested in your fights. Obviously, that's not like a weakness in the cage. I'm just complaining about Rakic. That's the main point of that. I don't have a super solid read on how this fight's going to go. I could see Rakic using his grappling to wear on Yuri and eventually score a knockout. I could see a crazy knockout in round one from either guy. If Yuri starts going for some crazy retard shit and Rakic catches him, then he could totally get dropped and finished. But ultimately, for a number of reasons, I will be picking Yuri Prochazka to win this fight by KO in round one. I think it's going to be a flying knee, guys. I don't know how it's going to get set up. I think it will be with Rakic against the cage, so he doesn't have much room to back up. I don't know how Yuri's going to get him there. Some sort of weird, weeaboo, stupid blitz with his hands down, throwing these stupid punches from these dumbass angles. This head ass top knot, but he's going to get it done, guys. Love him or hate him. This fucking dork who spends all of his time in the woods is going to knock out your boy. He's going to smash your Austrian boy. And he's going to get it done in round one. And he's going to call for a title shot against the winner of Jamal Hill versus Alex Pereira as well, too. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see him versus the winner of that fight if they do end up booking it. But the next matchup, finally onto the main card, is actually one that's getting more interesting the more I think about it. I don't think Cody Brundage is going to get it done, guys. But I think he could. I think he can hit hard enough to. The main thing is that Bo Nickal's just got this aura, And if Bo Nickal goes in there and finishes the first takedown, it's going to be up to the dog inside of Cody Brundage whether or not he's going to give up and just lose that fight right there. Even if Bo Nickal can't finish him on the ground and Cody Brundage is defending everything, if he lets the fact that Bo Nickal was able to take him down effortlessly get into his head, he lost the fight because then Bo Nickal will be able to strike with him as well. Whereas I think if Cody Brundage, even if he gets taken down early, is able to stay calm, mitigate any offense that Bo has on the ground to the best of his ability, slowly and methodically work his way back up, and just try and stuff one takedown attempt from Bo over the course of round one, he has made this fight so much more winnable for him. The biggest thing he's working against here is Bo's zero. That's it. And the fact that he's kind of a little bitch and quit against Jacob Malkoun. But we don't have to talk about that much in this matchup. It just is the case, right? But Cody Brundage is not good at fighting off of his back. He showed that in that Malkoun fight. He got out-grappled by Cedriquis Dumas. So he's being set up as a lamb to the slaughter here. And it's really prime for Bo Nickal to just go in there, do whatever he wants to Cody Brundage. I'm just saying this card, even as somebody who's not like a Bo Nickal hater, I want to see Bo Nickal be successful in his career because I think that he's a great prospect. if they're going to set up a fight as stupid as this on the main card, then the best outcome for it is Cody Brundage knocking him out. That's the most entertaining, exciting outcome for that fight. That'll be the most riveting way possible for it to go. And I think he could get it done. I think he has a chance to get it done. I think he has the best opportunity of getting it done that perhaps anybody that Bo has fought so far has had. But I am still going to have to pick Bo Nickal to submit Cody Brundage in round 1. I don't know how he's going to do it. I could see it being like an anaconda or like a bulldog choke or like some sort of front headlock choke. I could see them ending up in sort of like a sprawl position. One thing, why doesn't Cody Brundage try and wrestle Bo first? I think he'll lose still. And I think that Bo is going to be better in the scrambling. But it might put it into Bo's head that this guy isn't like terrified to go to the ground with me. He wants to go to the ground with me too. And that could be interesting as well. I don't think it's going to seriously change the dynamics of the matchup. But it's also a way to make it to where you're not giving up first initiative in every grappling exchange with this guy, which everybody has done. Because just like when you're fighting like a Habib or an Islam, is like the thing GSP was saying, nobody ever tried to take Habib down. Volk tried to take Islam down. He failed, but he tried it. And that's definitely interesting. And, I've been doing these kind of weird where I've been like first taking some of them and then going into the next video on a separate take, or like flowing through them. And I was gonna, take a break and drink some water, but I am too excited to talk about Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. So I'm jumping right into it. Number 1 versus number 4 in the division where they all chase Islam Makhachev. There's a 2-inch advantage in reach going the way of Charles Oliveira, and a 7-year disadvantage in age rather for Garbrandt as well. He's been around the block more, has Garbrandt, and you can tell that by the 44 compared to 24 fights that they have on their record. But to break down this matchup, guys, Charles is better everywhere. Now, is his wrestling better? No. Is his scrambling better, though? Maybe, but not for sure. Is his jiu-jitsu better? Yes. Is his defense on the ground better? Yes. Is that just submissions, or am I talking striking? Talking about both. And is he chinny enough for Arman to knock him out? Certainly. But I said it in the video where I predicted this fight in full. Justin Gaethje was able to knock him down, never able to knock him out. Dustin Poirier, not able to knock him out. Chandler, able to knock him down, not able to knock him out. Islam Makhachev, able to knock him down, not able to knock him out. And Arman is a ground and pound guy at the root of it. If he gets a knockdown on Charles, he is not likely to follow the Islam game plan. I know he's 5-0 by sub, but most of those subs are before he was in the UFC. I don't even know if he has a sub win in the UFC. I don't remember. It's been long enough since I made that video. But if he does, it was super early. He is not finishing guys at that highest level by sub in his career right now. And it's because when he's on the ground, he prefers to smash. But Charles showed in that Dariush fight his ability to grapple offensively and defensively posed so many problems to guys because his head movement off bottom posed Dariush some serious issues. But it was more so, I feel, the threat of submissions making Dariush have to be wary of his shot selection at all times to not give Charles an easy way to grab his arm and throw up his hips or anything like that. So I really don't see Arman dropping Charles and then being able to just jump on him. If he gets into side control, maybe he could get something done. But I could see Charles reestablishing his half guard and being able to control Arman's posture and not let him finish him. And once they're on the ground, I actually see more problems for Arman than I do for Charles, even though he doesn't have any losses by sub. Because if you're ever going to get your O taken by sub, then it's going to be Charles that takes it from you. But I don't think Charles is going to submit Arman. I think he's going to knock him out in round 1. I actually think Arman will not be urgent to get this fight to the ground. I think he will want to strike with Charles. And I think that's a mistake, because I think while he has the power to knock Charles down, Charles has the power to clean his clock, to just absolutely put him out cold. Joaquim Silva had him wobbling all around, and Charles Oliveira hits harder than him. I guarantee you. We've seen Justin Gaethje get hit by some of the best lightweights in the world across generations of lightweights. And when Oliveira hit him, he got flung around like a sack of potatoes. He thumps, man. He thumps. The only reason that he wasn't rocking Islam is because of how defensively responsible Islam is, and Arman isn't that defensively responsible. Charles Oliveira is getting it done. My favorite dog lock on the card for sure. But moving up, we have Justin Gaethje taking on Max Holloway for the dumb ass BMF belt. It's going down at 155. There is not really much of interest to look at in the height or reaches in these matchups, and the records are actually very similar as well. Obviously, a lot more KOs on Gaethje's end, but he has been KO'd twice by Eddie Alvarez and by Dustin Poirier, whereas Max Holloway has technically never even been knocked down. I will say I do count that one that happened against Dustin Poirier, though, where he staggered against the fence, because I know that would have been a knockdown otherwise. But regardless, this fight will be a war. I see Gaethje's low kicks posing significant issues to Max Holloway. And even though Holloway was able to get through a low kicker in Jose Aldo twice, Aldo's low kicks were a much less centric part of his game towards the end of his career. And Aldo was able to beat him in that phase of his career. I'm not saying Aldo was washed. I think that argument is stupid. But I don't think that low kicks were as big of a part of that fight as they were in, say, the Volkanovski fights with Max Holloway. But on the other hand, I think that while Justin Gaethje's been able to control the pacing really well in his fights recently, to make them much more controlled and the chaos be more sporadic instead of being throughout the whole fight, he is still going to be weak to the body shots that he has been exposed for being weak to throughout his fight. Rafael Fiziev was not able to capitalize on this, but you were able to see guys with good boxing fundamentals in the pocket in Dustin Poirier and Eddie Alvarez methodically work to Gaethje's body to actually be able to hurt him. Throughout the first half of round 1 against Justin Gaethje, Eddie Alvarez was landing nice check hooks, nice 1-2s on Gaethje, and never really doing anything significant to him. But around the halfway point to the round, he starts to seriously pick up the volume of shots that he throws to the body. And then when you see him go high with a hook, it twists Gaethje's head around and makes him stumble backwards a little bit more, already showing the impact that making him think about his body does to the damage you're able to do to him up top. And it's one thing that makes me really feel confident in this pick, even though it's a tough one to make, and I could definitely get exposed for this. I think that a lot of people are rightfully picking Gaethje here, but Max Holloway, towards the end of his fight with Dustin Poirier, the second one, was starting to work to the body more and more and starting to have more and more success with that game plan. And I think if he would have been using it earlier with how competitive that fight was, it could have been something for him. So when you're talking about that, and then considering him in a matchup with a guy who has shown that if you're able to touch his body where he's less defensively responsible traditionally as well, that you're able to get the knockout on him, it really makes me start to feel like we've been counting Max Holloway out on this one for the wrong reasons. I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with his YouTube channel vlogs too. I haven't seen all of them, but he is bulking up to lightweight. It would have been better if he was able to have some time where he could focus on bulking so that he's not doing that while he is going to also have to cut weight back down. It's just not really how your body is designed to create and store muscle. It's best to create a bunch of muscle and then cut, as opposed to trying to create muscle in the midst of doing all of the other stuff that you're doing for a weight cut and for martial arts training, because you also have to do cardio training. You have to do other strength and conditioning training that isn't going to necessarily build muscle mass in the same way you want to as well. But he is way bulkier. I think that they're going to be roughly the same size as each other on fight night. Max Holloway might be a little bit smaller, but I will ultimately be picking Holloway, and I'm not going to pick Holloway to defeat Justin Gaethje by decision. I'm picking him to stop Gaethje in round 4 against the cage, hurting him to the body, making him shell up, and capitalizing in the way we know Max Holloway can with volume. And the Blessed Express is headed to lightweight, baby. I think he's going to call out Islam Makhachev. I think he might call out Ilia Topuria, but you can book it right now. I think Max Holloway is going to somehow win this matchup at UFC 300. And I think we were all wrong to count him out. But next up, in the co-main event of the evening, we have Zhang Weili taking on Yan Xiaonan to defend her women's strawweight championship. Yan Xiaonan currently the #1 contender in the division. But guys, I'm not going to spend too much time breaking down this matchup. The main reasons being that Yan Xiaonan's biggest route to victory is catching Weili while she's closing in on her with a counter shot, as she was able to do against Jessica Andrade, because she does have the power to hurt Weili. And we've seen Weili obviously get knocked out, but that was only by the head kick by Rose Namajunas. And I don't see Yan Xiaonan being able to work in her kicking game that successfully, because her ground game sucks so bad that if she is throwing naked kicks by any means at Weili, whether they're head kicks or not, she is not Rose Namajunas. She does not have the caliber of kicking game or range management that Rose Namajunas has. She has to knock out Weili with punches, which we've not seen anyone do. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I just don't see it happening necessarily. And since we have seen Weili, who's a jack of all trades, really phenomenal on the feet, has knockout power, but also she's been working her grappling into her fights recently to phenomenal success, dominating Amanda Lemos in one of the most one-sided performances we've ever seen, men's or women's MMA. I see Zhang Weili getting this one done pretty easily. I'm going to pick Zhang Weili by unanimous decision in this fight. I think that she will probably get it done 50-45, at worst 49-46. And I could even honestly, the more I think about it, see her getting the sub. I'm just not necessarily going to pick it. I think I'm going to pick her by decision, and then she's going to get the sub so that I look stupid. But I'm a Zhang fan, so I'm cool if she gets the sub just to make me look like an idiot. I won't be too pressed by that. As long as my girl gets it done, I'm happy. But without any further ado, this video has been long enough as it is, but these matchups are all bangers. We have to get them all covered, and no banger is more of a banger than the matchup between the current champion at light heavyweight, Alex Pereira, facing off against its #1 contender and former champion who never lost his belt in the octagon, Jamal Sweet Dreams Hill. Already done a full breakdown on this video. I will link it in the card up above. Go ahead and check that one out. But I think the biggest things to highlight are that this is an orthodox versus southpaw matchup, only the second one that Pereira has been in the UFC. In the first one against Bruno Silva, he was much less able to employ his low kicks against Bruno Silva in a southpaw stance. And I saw someone say that he broke his foot some part way through the first, and that was a reason why. I've not been able to independently verify that. But I will say that the low kicks were also less successful, less damaging, and much more telegraphed against Bruno Silva regardless, which is not Pereira's fault. It's just by nature of an orthodox versus southpaw matchup that will be the case. And furthermore, I think that the range striking of Pereira is certainly noteworthy, obviously a very good tool of his, but he's really good at counter striking, whether it be when Yuri Prochazka had him hurt backed up against the fence, he was able to push him into that left hook and find the finish, or when Sean Strickland was walking him down, able to confidently strike off of his back foot with power. One of the big things I'd like to highlight for Pereira in this matchup, whereas Jamal Hill really good at keeping it on the outside as well, but also really good when he gets in close. I think the most interesting thing here is that Pereira's probably worst shot to defend on the feet is any straight punches, ones and twos, whereas for Jamal Hill, it's definitely the left hook, which is also coincidentally the other person's best strike, which is why this matchup is as interesting as it ends up being. You have a matchup where either guy could knock the other one out. Pereira's head defense for striking has gone down around 15 to 20%, I want to say, since moving up from 185 to 205. And a lot of that comes down to him being less chinny, less worried about getting knocked out. But he is still able to get hurt. He's human at the end of the day. And if there's anybody who's able to do it, it's going to be somebody who covers distance in as elusive and oftentimes confusing and weird of a way as Jamal Hill does. A lot of people have been shitting on his footwork, but it catches a lot of guys off guard and makes them get hit from angles and timings that they don't expect them to get hit by. And all of those reasons are the reasons why I was picking back then. And unlike every other MMA YouTuber who said that they were going to pick Jamal Hill and then decided to back out on it as it got closer to the fight, I am not. I am still picking Jamal Sweet Dreams Hill to knock out Alex Poatan Pereira in round 2. I think Pereira will win the first round. I think his leg kicks will have more impact than I've previously given them credit in this matchup for having, since it is that southpaw versus orthodox, and I expect them to be stifled to some degree. But I think that he'll be able to knock Hill off balance and have a competitive round 1 with him. And I don't think we see any grappling at all in this matchup. I think we see Pereira land a left hook or two during round 1 and in the beginning parts of round 2. But just as when he landed them against Jan Blachowicz, not every Pereira left hook is going to put your lights out or even wobble or seriously hurt you. Jamal Hill is going to be able to eat them, continue to walk forward at Pereira, and eventually we are going to see either Pereira get Hill backed up to the fence or vice versa, and Hill will be able to uncork a 1-2 in the middle of Pereira unleashing a combination, and Pereira will either be wobbled or just drop right off the bat, and Jamal's not going to give him any time to recover. He's going to be swinging in the hammer fists until the ref pulls him off, and he will win the main event of UFC 300 by knockout, reclaiming his belt and ending this run that Alex Pereira has been on since losing his middleweight title. But thank you guys so much for thugging it out through this long video. I appreciate you guys watching it. It took a ton of effort, so I'd appreciate a like and a sub if you guys have made it this far. And let me know what your guys' favorite fights are on the card down below. If I got any picks brutally wrong, let me know right now, but come back to troll me later when I'm wrong about them especially. And I hope y'all have a wonderful rest of your night. Peace out.